Hi everyone, Kim Schofield here. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today I am going to be introducing you to some new stamps from Sweet and Sassy, and we are going to be walking through how to create some quick and easy backgrounds using a few different mediums. So here are the brand new stamp sets that are being released from Sweet and Sassy for December. And these are silhouette stamps. I love them. Forgive my little shine there from the light. I love these stamps because they are so much fun to use when creating scenes. So you can create little background scenes, and especially these beautiful nature scenes I really like. Love this stamp with the tall grasses, just really beautiful. So to get started, we're going to create a galaxy background using watercolor paints, and that's going to be our first background. And you can see the completed card here using that bear silhouette image. So I have, these are just some watercolor paints, and you could use anything for this. And I've created a little bit of a hill using some Scotch masking tape. This is it has a low tack on one adhesive on one side. And so what I'm doing is I'm actually going in and picking up some color and just adding that on to random places onto my paper. Now this is Ranger watercolor cardstock that I'm using, and you'll want to be using a watercolor paper for this. And you can wet the paper first and then apply the color. I did not do that on this sample, but either version works well because with watercolors, you can just come in and add more water and that will just get those colors moving. So either option I have found works fine. You can even do this technique with distress inks. You can also do it with acrylic paint. So it works well with both, or with a bunch of different mediums. So I am just placing random colors. It doesn't matter if they run together. That is completely fine. So just most of this is going to be covered up. So just some colors you might see in a night sky. You could also do this. I'll come in quite dark. So mine will be like a dark night sky, but you could do the same technique using deep blues or purples. That would be really pretty as well. So I'm just coming in, I'm going to make sure my paper is completely dry before I move on to the next step. All right, so now that that paper is dry, I am actually coming in with black. And you're probably going to see this and say, oh my gosh, what the heck is she doing? I'm covering everything up again, and that is true, I am. So this is creating our night sky, and all I'm trying to do is really getting this black on with a little bit of that color peeking through in a few areas. So I'm dabbing that on, again, going in, and you can start with a little bit heavier pigment, and then I can come back in and add water if I want to. And then I'm also working in a bit of a swirling motion. You can dab this on, swirl it around. You really want to create this illusion of clouds and that texture that you might see in the sky. And so if you go in with a little bit heavier pigment and you don't like that, you know, these are watercolors, they're going to react right away with water. So I'm going in, picking up more water to get those colors to run and react together. And you don't want to do a lot of swiping with your brush back and forth because that will reactivate the colors underneath. And then you really could get kind of a muddy mess. You want to be able to see some of that color that you painted on first peeking through the black or any kind of whatever dark color you add on top. Now I went in, I had a little bit of pooling, so I just wanted to remove a little bit of that color, and I'm just using a dry cloth to do that. And that's just before I go in and dry this completely. And really, this is such a fun technique. You can't mess it up, really. It always looks great. And you'll never get the same look twice. You'll always have a different look, which is really a lot of fun. And then you can see as I dry that with the heat tool, that black is going to dry back and you get that beautiful texture. And with that, just that little bit of color peeking through. So now I'm picking up my white And I'm applying some of this white paint onto an acrylic block. And actually, this is the first time I ever tried using the acrylic block. I usually just flick the paint on with my brush, but I really like the acrylic block. You kind of get a little smaller splatters, and you definitely do have a little bit more control. So I am a fan of this. So this is where you really get that night sky look when you add the white splatters on, because now it looks like stars. It's beautiful. I love it. You could even use a white gel pen to go in and darken up some of those if you wanted to, because the white watercolor will dry back a little bit. So now I had some nice boo-boos in today's cards, on the cards that I made today. Here's going to be my first one, but I'll show you how I fixed it. So it's no tragedy, but you can see my watercolor kind of ran under the tape, so I didn't have a very good seal there. But not to worry, you can cover that up with white gesso, or you could even use a Sharpie pen and just color over that. So what I ended up doing was using some white gesso, and so you can see that all that paint down on the bottom is completely cleared up. You can't even see it. I end up covering this anyway with a little die cut hill, but you can tell that even if I didn't have that piece on the top, it would be fine. So this is another Sweet and Sassy stamp set. This is from last Christmas, I think last year. So I just wanted to add a little bit of design onto this cream cardstock I have here. And I'm just using this branch stamp to add just a little bit. It's very subtle because I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment on top of that. So I don't want anything too dark that's going to compete with the letters in my sentiment. And I'm using some distress antique linen to do that. And this is just a die cut. I have a hill die cut, and then I die cut the bear there on the circle and stamped him using some black archival ink. And I really wanted the bear to be kind of behind the hill. And so that's why I ended up die cutting the hill there. So I could tuck that little circle down under it. And now I'm going to go ahead and use my Mini Misty to stamp the sentiment. Excuse my head there. Just to make sure that if I need to restamp it, I won't mess up. And I am using black archival, which is one of my favorite inks for sentiments. And this actually came out pretty well on the first try. Love when that happens. And now I'm just deciding where I want all of my pieces to go, and I'll attach the bear on flat, and then I will use foam tape to pop up the back there. And then I'm just going to finish off my card by adding some Nouveau drops, and this is in a gold, which looks really pretty with my background, and I'll add a few little gold berries onto those branches. And so that's the first of our 3 quick and easy backgrounds. The next is this distress ink background, and this is probably one of my favorites. It's so easy, and you can just do so many unique and interesting techniques and backgrounds using distress inks. So I am going to be using the Ranger watercolor paper again. I'm using the smooth side, not the textured side, but any kind of good white cardstock will work for this. And then I have a collection of distress inks here. I'm using mostly oxide inks. And I'm going to start simply by laying down some of the yellow, and this is fossilized amber color, up at the top of my card. And I'm just using a round blending tool, and I'm working in a circular motion. And staying in that circular motion will really ease with your blending, make all your blending smooth, and you won't get any of those round, the circles from the excuse me, from the blending tool. So now I'm going to go back, and I have die cut a large circle there, kind of like a sun, and I just did kind of a yellow on top of the yellow, and now I'm going to go back in with an orange color, so this is a little bit darker, and you can even bring in some reds as well. This card, I kept it very, very simple, but you really can do quite a lot with these distress inks. They blend together just beautifully. So again, going in and darkening up around that circle. So now I really have that nice setting sun look. And that completes the sky. And again, just you can do a wide variety of colors in your sky. So I wanted these to be very quick and easy backgrounds. So now I'm going to create the grass, and I'm using peeled paint. Again, using the Distress Oxide inks. And you'll see with this card how I have a little boo-boo with this card, but these Distress inks work so well and they blend together so easily. They're so smooth and creamy that it's really easy to blend things out. So see, my green went up into the yellow a little bit, and all I do is come back in with my yellow sponge and blend over that. And now I pretty much I've got a grass area, and I've got my sky area and my setting sun. I'm using some crushed olive to add a little bit of depth to the bottom of this, but you could leave it as it is. And then if there's any harsh lines you don't like, you just go in and blend that out. So I wanted to create a little bit of a horizon line. And I wasn't really crazy about how this ended up turning out, but it worked in the end. So I'm using Vintage Photo Distress Oxide ink, and I just have a piece of torn cardstock that I just tore by hand. But it ended up looking a little bit more like a dust storm, I think, instead of a horizon line, or maybe my horizon line is just a little too high. So I moved it down a little bit, but now I'm going to show you how I end up blending everything out. So I'm just coming back in again with my fossilized amber ink and going right over that Vintage Photo. And you can see how well that just starts to blend everything together, and that brown really starts to get knocked back into the background. And then I'll come in and work the green on the other side. And the end result was fine. I think it'd be better probably with a more narrow line and a little bit deeper line, like a black ink instead of the brown. But I was very happy with it in the end. You just got to keep working it. That's what I think with these distress inks. And so now I'm going to go in and darken up that orange just to make my sun pop a little bit more. So now I have my two little deer, and again, I'm using my Misty because these are the solid images like this. Sometimes you need to stamp them twice. So it is good to prep them. You can either just wipe the stamps with your hand, and this is just for acrylic stamps, or wipe over them with a cloth. I find sometimes if you just stamp them once using some archival ink, just on a scrap piece of paper, that's a good way to prep them as well. So I got a pretty good first image. The larger deer there needed a little bit more stamping, so I decided to go in twice, do that twice. Do a little CPR there on my mini Misty. And then I am going to go over this one more time just to make sure I have a very solid stamped image. So now that that's done, there's actually a little tiny bird in this set, and I'm going to do the same thing again. Just stamp that up a few times, and then I actually stamped the bird twice. And now I can go and I'm actually going to add some of these grasses. So I'm doing a tone on tone. So I'm using this same oxide ink that I used for the blending. And I'm just going to go ahead and add some of this up at the top. So be very subtle. It's not going to be anything that's, screaming, standing out. I know you're thinking, why did you put grass up in the sky? I don't know. I just thought it would be interesting there. And to be honest, I liked it. There's something a little bit different. I really felt like the card needed a little bit of design up in that corner up there. And so now I can go ahead and add some grasses onto the bottom. And I like the way that little grass looks at the top, looks up around the top of that. I really like that. So again, I'm doing tone on tone. So I'm using the same color green ink. the peeled paint as I did to create the background. And so sometimes if you're not entirely sure what you want to add, sometimes it's better to start with a lighter color and then you can come in and darken that up. So now I am adding just a little bit of shadow. This is a fantastic, and I'm just adding a little shadow under the deer's feet because they kind of look like they were floating there. So I want to ground them a little bit. My larger deer, actually, where I put my sentiment, you don't end up seeing the shadow under his feet. But this was the fantastic is great for picking up just a little bit of ink, and it's like having a little pencil and putting that just where I wanted it to go. And that grounds them just a little bit. And then I did add a little bit more of the grass and some of the vintage photo and a little bit of black there as well. So for my sentiment, I stamped it in black ink, and then I'm going to emboss it just with clear embossing powder, and that's just so it really pops up off the vellum. And of course, I want to be careful when heating vellum so it doesn't warp. So making sure my heat tool is good and hot before I let it start to melt the embossing powder. And then I'm just going to cut that sentiment down, and I use some glue in the back and attach that onto the front of my card. So now for our final background, this is using alcohol ink with Yupo paper. And you can see that background here. This is fun. This are so many variations you can do with this technique. So you do need Yupo paper to do this. I have some blending solution, archival inks, so you want to have archival ink. This doesn't work with a dye ink. And I have a felt piece on my blending tool. So all I'm doing is swiping some of these archival ink colors across my Yupo paper. So Yupo paper is like a coated paper. It's very, very smooth, and it reacts with alcohol inks. So now I'm going to put some blending solution onto my felt piece. You could use a cotton ball for this too, and watch this reaction. Woohoo! Isn't that fun? Oh my goodness. I have sat before in the afternoon and like just made a bunch of these. There's so much, just so much fun. You can put the blending solution right on top. You don't have to use the little felt piece, and it will react, and it will keep reacting. So if you let this completely dry and touched it again with the blending solution, it would react all over again. So you can just keep getting a whole bunch of different designs and textures. It's very, very cool. And I did change out that felt piece just when I got to the lighter color, so I wasn't pulling that green down in. So I cut that down to a little under 5 by 5. And then I die cut a large circle here, and that's going to serve as the focal point for my images. And I'm going to use some of the, so I'm using the same colors as I did in the background to color up this die cut circle. And I'm, again, just using my blending tool and blending the archival ink onto the circle. And archival ink actually does work really well for blending. It dries faster than a dye ink, but you can blend with it. And so now I'm going to use these other colors for stamping. So I'm going to stamp my first grass here in the gray ink. And you can see I didn't get a really clean stamped image, but that's okay because I'm actually going to go over it with this other grass stamp in a little bit darker color. So you won't be able to tell. It might be a good idea, to use a MISTI if you have a MISTI tool, because then you could have come back and stamped right over that. But with these grasses, you really can, you kind of can't go wrong because you can just fill in more if you miss anything. But you can tell once I add that the other grass, you can't see that spot that didn't stamp very well. And then I'm going to go back to my other set with the animals and the birds and grab that nice, beautiful, I think makes me think of like an eagle image, and stamp that in the really deep navy blue. which I think would be fun a lot of times. So I'm testing this out to see, do I like this? This was another thing I did. Is the bird too big? No, I like it. So a lot of times I test things out on scrap pieces of paper before I actually commit, so you don't have to start over again. So I think it'd be fun to use these silhouette images. Sometimes we always think of, well, I'll do it in a black or a dark color, but I think stamping them in these other colors is really fun as well. So I'm just have a sentiment here from another Sweet and Sassy sentiment set, and I'm going to go ahead and stamp that in black or on a piece of black cardstock using an embossing ink, which is a sticky ink, and that is so my embossing powder will cling to it. And then I'm going to emboss that in white. And I'm going to lose my cap in the process for my embossing powder. And once that heats, you can tell because once that's ready to go, it turns shiny. And you can see I just mounted that cut piece on a top folding card, and then I added my die cut circle with some foam tape. And then here's my second boo-boo. No, this is my third. 3 cards, 3 good mistakes. Well, you know, it happens. It wasn't really a mistake. It was more a, oh, that's a good idea. So I knew I wanted my sentiment to go there. And then I thought, but I want it to fit perfectly on that circle. But I already, you know, taped down my main area, but I got it off. I pulled it all off, popped up my sentiment. And of course, where the paper tears, you're not going to see it. And then I really wanted it to fit in on the circle and then cut off that excess. I'd like to say I have great ideas before, but usually I just, you know, what I create happens as I sit down. I don't usually have a lot of thought about it beforehand. And that tape holds. So I just added some more tape, and that is it for me today. So head on over to my blog for more detailed photos and over to the Sweet and Sassy store to purchase products. Happy crafting.